everyone, welcome to another episode of the Silicon Dreams on Radio Zindagi 1550 AM. This is your show host, RJ Soniya. I am the founder of Orbis 86, and today, joining us straight live from the Radio Zindagi studio in Fremont, we have our guests Murtuza and Asif. And folks, here's the thing, you can actually call us in today and we'll be able to answer your questions live on the radio show. So what are we waiting for? Let's dive headfirst into what's next for the future of artificial intelligence and AI. And in order to let you know who are the experts we have in studio today, I am going to go over to Murtuza and then Asif and ask them to quickly introduce themselves to the amazing, fantabulous audience listening in to the Silicon Dreams on Radio Zindagi. Murtuza, welcome to the Silicon Dreams.
Thank you so much, Soniya. My name is Murtuza Haryanawalla, but you can even call me Matt. Great being here. Thank you, Soniya, for having me. A little about me. Do you want me to introduce now or you want to go? Okay. So a little about me. I was a track chair for TiCon just last week for generative AI, where we had 3 panels and a keynote. We had a full house, just standing space. I'm also ex-Broadcom. I was the director at Accelerate. IT, and I'm also the founder right now. We are running a group called Llama Labs, where we bring together the community in generative AI, enterprises, startups, decision makers, and creators, aka developers. So we really feel all of these are stakeholders for generative AI, and we're bringing all of that together.
Absolutely, folks. Accelerate is a venture capital firm. That's where Murtuza was last working at. And right now with Llama Labs, Murtuza is working on bringing together the community behind generative AI. And if you guys have been reading in the news, Gen AI has been taking over the world by storm. This last quarter, we had investments to the tune of 2.5 billion plus being poured into AI, thanks to the resurgence of generative AI and transformers. And just with that, we're going to go from Murtuza to Asif. Asif, welcome back to the Silicon Dreams. It was a pleasure chatting with you, and we spoke about the journey of AI, its evolution. Last time, it was like 2 weeks ago when we spoke about it. Would you go ahead and introduce yourselves again to the audience that's listening into us to the show today?
Soniya, thank you for inviting me here again. So I am the founder of a company named SupportVectors. Our mission is to do all things AI. We build products with AI. We do consulting and advice on AI. At the same time, our mission is to build the next generation of AI engineers. So we provide training and education in AI.
So folks, again, if you haven't checked out SupportVectors, go to their website. Asif has been running SupportVectors even before the resurgence of AI. He has been doing this for how many years now, Asif?
Since 2016.
Since 2016, that's onwards of almost 8 years now, closing
Yes.
into 8 years. And he has trained executives at some of the world's top companies. They are now at Google, Amazon, Microsoft, and so on. And he was also the head of education. He led it at Cornerstone. So Asif has been teaching people for years about AI, and there have been hundreds or thousands of students who have graduated so far.
Thousands now, thousands of engineers.
students who have graduated.
Asif, I have to join your course.
You're most welcome, though. I hope as an instructor.
Oh, well, no, as a student, always learning. There's some amazing. Just last week, I was at the NASDAQ Center, for this group teaching entrepreneurship to kids in high school. And that was amazing stuff, ideas, you learn so much from these high school kids, especially in AI and generative AI. So would love to learn more.
Sure, you're welcome.
Absolutely. And today we are also going to take up the Herculean task of educating our listeners about what AI is, what's next for AI. Let me start by asking you guys, let's talk about one recent news headlines that you have come across, or one recent development from the past week or 2 weeks that you think is going to bring about a revolution in this world of AI. Murtuza, I would love to go with you.
So just recently, not even recently, just yesterday, I think Sam Altman, and they released one document on super AI. and that's something which is so hot off the press. There are three elements of that which they talk about. OpenAI just released that document of why it's so important and what those 3 points are as far as super AI, and why it's important for us as humans to consider policies, to consider certain rules as a human race, to put into place. And we can talk a little bit in details about those 3 points, but largely they are mainly about about the need for governance. This is for super AI. This is not for low hanging things like, hey, yours go and replace some of the low hanging applications. But this is for,
Let's talk a bit about super AI. What is the definition of super AI, right? Like, people who are listening in, they know about AI and they already are overwhelmed by AI. What are we talking about when we talk about super AI? Are we talking about achieving superhuman intellectual levels where us as human beings would not be able to fathom what's happening? So what is the definition of super AI in your own words?
What I was reading about, and this is from their article, but it is akin to nuclear. When we discovered nuclear reaction, right? We needed to put policies in place. It's similar to that, that we need to put, AI is going to be transformational. It is going to be extremely, it is going to help us all benefit a lot. Our standard of living is going to increase a lot, but it comes with its own challenges and its dangers. So we need to make sure that we put these policies in place. We need to have governments align on we need to get self-governance from enterprises, and we need to put in place policies, almost like third-party organizations who validate, who test, and who make sure that we control what amount of growth that we are seeing in AI. So super AI is going to be like unfeathered growth, right? So we need to make sure that we have those policies of what is the rate of growth that is acceptable. For example, what are the resources that are being used, like energy, compute resources, so put in place policies, and this has to be both government level, enterprise level also.
Absolutely. I think it is extremely important. I know Europe recently had passed the AI Act. So putting policies and governance in place is important, because not only are we going to look at enterprises trying to leverage AI to its fullest extent to try and milk all the customers, right? There are going to be many use cases, obviously, but there has to be something that builds up on an ethical premise. But also there are going to be bad actors who are not going to necessarily follow all of this infrastructure or the conventions we put in place. We will cover all of those topics today during our show. Just before we do that, I'm going to go to Asif and ask for his hot take on a recent news headline that he came across. It could be from the news, or it could just be from the research papers he's actually screening through every single day.
Sonia, actually, you scooped me when you talked about Europe. Just today, I was looking at the draft that's being formed. It's going to come out as the AI Act next month. Now, as I entered your studio today, I noticed on one of the pillars a beautiful saying, "Future is what you make." And I like that very appropriately for AI. See, when we, in the last talk that we had, if you remember, I ended with the admonition that with nuclear technology, we put governance in place. With genetic technology, we put governance in place. When CRISPR came out, the governments came together and regulated it. My concern was we are not moving fast enough with AI. People are making an effort. If you look at the perspective with European effort, there's a spectrum of views. On one hand, people feel it's too draconian. On the other hand, people feel it may not be enough. Now, where it falls, we will find out in due course of time. But the one thing that remains is, it's a very powerful tool, very much like nuclear. Today we use nuclear for nuclear medicine to great advantage. What we do with AI completely depends on us, and we do need collective effort, a collective consensus on how do we shape the future with it.
How do we shape the future with it, right? How do we shape the future to make it AI proof in a way? And when I say AI proof, I'm not talking about leveraging AI for the common good of the people, but rather trying to inhibit and stop the bad actors in the AI spectrum who could possibly leverage AI. As you said, it's a tool, right? When we talk about, you brought about some good points, like Murtuza spoke about nuclear weapons or nuclear tools being used. Nuclear fission by itself was a discovery, right? It was a great tool that was supposed to bring forth clean energy, flood the world with a sustainable, non-conventional energy resource. Unfortunately, the world was introduced to nuclear fission and the power of it through Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombings. So AI similarly is a tool in the hands of the people. In the hands of the right people, it will flourish. And in the hands of people who use it as a tool to harm others, there are going to be a lot of challenges that we will be talking about. That being said, before we jump into the negatives, let's talk about some of the positives. Now, at Llama Labs as well as at Support Vectors, you both have been helping people onboard into the world of AI. Let me ask you, over the next 5 years, let's say, right? What would you say people should focus on when it comes to learning about AI? Murtuza, I will go to you first. When you are talking to enterprises, accelerators, students, what are the components of AI that you're telling them they should explore, and what are some of the use cases where you see the augmentation through AI of these use cases will lead into let's say undeterred growth opportunities in those areas?
Absolutely. So, if I may, I just let me explain the basics of generative AI, and so we have been in the phase of predictive AI, which is what AI ML most of the companies have been working on. The second has been obviously the evolution of that has been around, deep learning, and now generative AI. But the basic fundamentals, the first principles is, AI can do text, which is predict text, or understand text, and do sentiment analysis and stuff like that. So it can play with text. The second phase of that is images. So you can think about it that AI can look at different images. So initially we showed them the AI images of cats and say, hey, this is definitely, and you show them a tiger and say this is not a tiger or this is a cat. In a very simple layman terms, that was what AI did well. And the next phase of it was video, stitching together those images and saying, okay, this is a moving cat or a moving dog or a moving. So that's the three basic principles of generative AI, that you can do operations with text, with images, and with stitching those together video. Now with generative, so that was, predictive AI. But with generative AI, now AI can say, hey, look, this is the text. So positionality becomes important, and this is where I think the next piece of text will come. For example, that lends itself to code. How do we code? So that's extension of text. The next is image. I have this 10 cats. I want a cat which looks like a dog. So I'm going to stitch together this image, and I'm going to be generative about it, right? So now I got a new image which doesn't exist, right? But now, and then the next is a video. Hey, these are the frames together. I've stitched together these images. I'm going to predict what other images or what other frames would, so that I make a moving video. I can change your facial expressions and all that because of the prediction that I'm going to do, and I'm going to generate new images. So that's the basic principles of generative AI, right? That's why we call it generative as opposed to predictive. Now, to to answer your question, right? It's about what are the applications or what people should be looking at. So there are lots of applications that you can see from text, and all these low-hanging applications are there. But the more important thing which people should be looking at is, the technical skills required to get the right output from these transformers, right? From these AI intelligence. For example, people are thinking that, hey, we are going to lose our jobs. We are designers. Are we going to lose our jobs? But you know what? You're not going to lose your jobs too, because even now, the presumption there is that you will know exactly what to ask the AI to do, which is what we call prompt engineering somewhat. But more importantly, that assumes that the customer knows what they want. But even the customer doesn't know what they want. If they knew that and if they had an exact way of asking the prompt to do what it is, then you wouldn't require designers or you wouldn't require people to work on the design. So the challenge is not really in the using the tool. It's about the human interactions, and that is not going away. What is going away is if you, being a designer, don't know how to translate those questions which the customer has in his mind and they're all fogged up, but they don't know how to put that in a way so that the AI can understand. So that's where you come in as a designer. You update your skill sets to do that. So that's where you need to focus on. This is an example, but there are other things you can focus on.
Absolutely. I actually love this analogy that we're talking about, because we're talking about jobs becoming redundant, right? But at the same time, it's the same machine revolution phase that we saw, or we saw the phase of the internet take over the industry by storm, where we always had a primary concern that jobs are going to be lost. But with machines coming in, with internet coming in, new jobs also came in. People just had to upskill themselves. Since we are talking about prompt engineering, right, which is, guys, for those listening in, if you don't know what prompt engineering is, it is essentially how you would ask an AI bot, an AI model, to get a certain task done, and you have to ask it in a certain way. Obviously, now a lot of you might have heard about Chat GPT. With Chat GPT, it has some amazing skills with natural language processing, or NLP for short. And if you just ask it in a very natural language, just like you have a conversation, Chat GPT in the back end translates it into the right kind of prompts to ask the GPT 3 or the GPT-4 engine in the background. That is what is powering Chat GPT, and it takes care of creating the prompts for you. However, when you're working directly with some of these models, you need to understand how you need to share those prompts, and generally those prompts are not in natural language. But with that being said, what I want to do is go to Asif, and Asif, we'll just continue this conversation. We were talking about how AI can be used to supercharge your workflows. Now, you must have seen co-pilots being used and being built on in almost every single industry. One of the most widely used co-pilots, I think, could be Microsoft's when it launches it. Now, we don't yet know what are going to be the paywalls behind which Microsoft's co-pilot would reside. However, the initial sneak peeks seem like it can do everything for you. So let's talk about co-pilots. Would you like to just explain what a co-pilot is, and how can co-pilots make our everyday jobs easier? And then building upon that, talk about how us as engineers, as workers in the industry, would become that primary interface between the LLM models, between this AI, between co-pilots, and as Murtuza said, customers, because those who are sitting and getting those jobs done, those people are the ones with the vision to really execute upon it. So Asif, over to you.
So one way to think about this co-pilot and what generative AI and these things are doing is to think in terms of two concepts. One is sheer efficiency. What is mundane? What can be anticipated? But still we have to do it. Like in coding, programming, and writing a lot of legal documents and medical documents, a lot of it can be anticipated by experts. And so still, for example, if you ask a doctor, and at this moment we are working with a medical group, one of their problems is they cannot give too much time to patients in consultation, because they have to reserve some time to then sit and write notes, and doctors hate it, absolutely. So that is one thing that it can help. So along the same line, the other thing that AI does, or generative AI does, is personalization. And that is where both the promise and the perils of generative AI is. See, imagine that you have the assistance of a person who does not have wisdom, but has tremendous knowledge, the entire knowledge of mankind, shadowing you, has significant specialized intelligence at the task that you're doing. They don't have generalized intelligence, but specialized intelligence. So whatever you're doing, you're getting a tailwind. It's accelerating, it's moving ahead and doing it for you. That is essentially co-pilots. It will do it for programmers, it will do it for lawyers, it will do it for any profession where there are aspects that can be anticipated, and it will do it much better. It won't make mistakes. That is the one good part about it. The part that is a little bit more troublesome, but we don't seem to see it, is these things also begin to understand how we behave. Right? And how we think. They begin to pick up patterns in our way of looking at it. So there is always the risk of perpetuating the stereotypes. We talked about it a little last time, but see, from the let's go back 10 years. We were talking of a technology that today almost seems assumed, and we don't think of it as great as generative AI, but it was still transformational in its age a decade ago, which was personalized recommendation systems. I don't know how true it is, but it was said that if you were in California and if you were to ask global warming is and stop there, the autocompletion would say great risk to mankind. Right. If you were in some other states of US, it would say global warming is a hoax.
Depending on whether you lean left or right, I believe.
I suppose so. I would like to believe that this is not true, because if it is true, it's profoundly disturbing that personalization engine is feeding you what you want to hear. Now, when you use generative AI and when you have a person without a moral compass shadowing you with the entire distillate of human knowledge and with specialized superintelligence, but only for limited tasks, AI is essentially objectives driven. See, at the heart of AI is minimization of a loss function. It's basically, it's a thing that do this very well. Essentially, that's what it means.
I love how you spoke about generative AI being able to look at the distillate, right, at all of this knowledge that it has to its disposition, and then trying to summarize it for you, for example, right? When Sam Altman spoke about the majority use cases that they saw ChatGPT was being used for, summarization was one big aspect. Now, what I want to say though is this entire repertoire of knowledge that is available, doesn't that knowledge also come with its own inherent set of biases? And the reason why I say that is because a lot of this data was created in the westernized societies, we could say that, right? Like if you look at the world's population and then you try to determine whether the knowledge repertoire that we have access to today, and this is a problem even with research. We were talking about healthcare. I've worked in the healthcare space for 10 plus years, and even in healthcare there is a huge shortage of data collected for indigenous tribes or data collected from cultures that aren't necessarily Caucasian cultures. And it's the same problem with generative AI too. I feel like the data that is being fed to generative AI, it is not necessarily culture rich. It doesn't have context from across the globe. So how do we tackle that problem where we find that inherent biases have already made its way into the training sets, I would say, the data that LLMs are being trained on? And for this one, I'll go to Asif and then come to Murtuza.
Yeah. It's very interesting, actually. These things that we generally, colloquially call the large language models is actually, it's a putting together of two things: a large language model and reinforcement learning with human feedback. So I'll speak to that. See, when you get something like a foundational model, a model that has been trained on all the available knowledge, that knowledge is toxic knowledge in many ways. It can spew out racism, sexism, and whatnot. Right? It is exactly the kind of education no parent would ever give their own child. Then comes a process of fine-tuning in which you say, all right, for specialized domains or for specialized tasks, let us give it extra training. You're trying to essentially discipline the child. And finally, you bring in reinforcement learning, which is literally carrot and stick learning. And when you look at a thing like ChatGPT, it has benefited a lot from reinforcement learning and human feedback, in which what it produces gets ranked by humans who say this was good, this was not so good. The same answer to the same prompt, multiple answers, it gets, and that gets into sort of a reinforcement practice, and you tame it. Now it brings a big question. Can bad actors choose to train it the other way around right? Train it, and the reinforcement training can be to introduce even more subtle racisms and bias. Just mask it, but preserve it so that it gets perpetuated. Another way to look at it is all of these things. We are now not writing essays ourselves. We are writing it using, let's say, this is what I'm told that people now write. If they want to write a paragraph of English, they go to ChatGPT because they don't trust themselves. And I have a historical parallel to it. In my generation, if you were mathematically savvy, one of the first things you would do is become very good friends with the log table in the anti-log table, because it reduces multiplication to addition and subtraction. Right. But today's generation, if you ask them, they sort of don't quite know about that you can do multiplication just on your own. They just take out the calculator and do it. And a similar thing can happen as we depend more and more on this technology. The question to ask is, what human faculties will lose? And by losing those faculties, how much are we becoming fossilized into the present? The beliefs, the viewpoints, the perspectives, the political ideologies of the present. Are we fossilizing it in stone so that forever the generations to come have a risk of just continuing with that?
This is an excellent point. I believe a lot of people who have been using ChatGPT could actually attest to it, right? Where, let's just call it human laziness, or even when I am working at 4 a.m. or 5 a.m. in the morning, rather than sitting down and thinking about, hey, what is a caption that I want to come up with, or an email that I want to write, I could just quickly plug a prompt into ChatGPT and use that. So this thing that you just brought up, which is trusting the AI more than yourself.
Yes.
It is fascinating, and at the same time it is terrifying. Because as you said, if the AI doesn't feed you that right information, you are going to get yourself into an abyss from which it would be very hard to actually tell the right from wrong and tell what is a fact, what is not a fact. I feel like we have always said in the past, right? If you repeat a lie 1,000 times over, it becomes the truth. And with generative AI, not necessarily at the moment having the guardrails to go and figure out facts. We all remember when GPT-3 was launched to the public, most of the times it would be preceded with a warning saying that, hey, don't use GPT-3 for fact checking, because it was absolutely horrible at fact checking. And that has still not come in. So now, as you said, with the wrong people training it, do you see a future where we could be hearing truths from AI that we think are truths, but in essence, those are things that have probably never even happened? It's just like this common conundrum we have had in the age of internet, where people have to tell each other, not everything you see on Google is true, guys. Are we going to see that same thing with AI?
Absolutely. There is no absolute truth. And that's the one learning that we need to be aware of, that every model, that these are the base models. They have been trained on a set of data based on that company or that person or their mission, And that is why we need to build on those models. We need to curate those models. There's something called weights and biases for every model. That I'm talking from the industry perspective. The baseline over there is, hey, we have different models. They have their own biases, just like we as humans have, and they were trained on that. Now we have to curate those with different weights and biases to make sure that they give us the kind of information which is slightly towards the normal rather than skewed on one end or the other. But having said that, again, all of this is going to be very subjective, to your point. And I agree totally with you that, for example, even the point you raised about healthcare, right? Being culturally sensitive, for example, right? So what applications will be really important will be like, hey, what's the best, doing an operation, doing a surgery. That doesn't change culturally. What changes culturally is the ethical issues around, hey, should we, if someone's on the deathbed, should we, what are the conditions under which they would be willing to do a certain operation or no, right? So those things are culturally kind of subjective, but the basic things about, so that's where healthcare, so for example, you would use AI for doing tasks like that, right? Which are repetitive tasks like surgery and all of that, but not so much on research around that, right? But not so much about which is culturally sensitive tasks. And to your point, right? So, I mean, definitely there is going to be bias. We have to agree to that. We have to understand that that's why the policies become very important. That's why everyone has to, all governments, the policymakers, as well as enterprises have to jump in and say, hey, look, we are going to self-regulate. Because if we don't do that, we are essentially screwed.
We are talking about regulations here, right? And that is, I think both of you mentioned that we are just not making progress at the speed at which we should be making progress. We have seen countries lag behind in the past decade. Even in the space of Web3 decentralization, the policies are becoming draconian. We are not really looking at progressive policies. Similarly, even with AI, we have seen Italy was trying Italy just shut down ChatGPT, right? Like ChatGPT is straight off banned in Italy, and it seems like what is happening is because the governments are not prepared for this new wave, and it is coming faster than what they anticipate. And in a lot of the countries, including US as well as a lot of European countries, unfortunately, the regulators who are working on this are people who are in their 60s, 70s, or almost on their deathbed. Not all of them, but a lot of them, right? The average age in the parliament and stuff, it's actually much higher than the average age in our studio today, right? And unfortunately, that is the world that we are looking at. What do you think is going to happen from a regulatory standpoint? What kind of regulations? We spoke about the regulations a little bit, but and at that time I said that let's pick this up again. So when it comes to regulations, we have seen in the news that Sam Altman, etc., not just for super AI, but there has also been an act around autonomous weapons, right? Regulating autonomous weapons, and to the point where some folks and some groups have come up and just said that we should not have autonomous weapons being developed at all. And just for context, autonomous weapons essentially are weapons that could target people, kill them, eliminate them without any human input. So they would obviously be trained, but it's not like handing a gun or a sniper, a gun in the hands of a sniper, for example, and then just allowing them to perfect their aim. This is not that. It's essentially just having a gun by itself, identify targets and shoot at them, either based on some trained algorithms or based on whatever inputs they're getting. So when it comes to regulations, in its nearest future, what are the top 3 areas of concern that you have on your mind, Murtuza, that you think regulation has to tackle right now?
So the framework I follow, is something I termed as PASS-ER. It's, policy, privacy, accuracy, the SS stands for security and support, and then context, which area or which industry it is. And each industry has to have this framework in which we evaluate whatever policies we put in place. So does it meet the requirements for privacy, security, and then the rate of, development, right? That's another thing that's self-regulatory, that we have to say that, okay, as an industry, we are growing so fast, but are we meeting all these, are we checkboxing all these things, the passer algorithm or the framework, are we meeting those for any development in this industry in generative AI? So I think that's very important if we keep that framework in mind. As far as policymakers go, they have to be part of the conversation. We have to bring them into the conversation. Unlike, because I don't blame them, we will go and blame them afterwards and say, hey, we should have made these policies. But for them, if I don't know something, let me shut it down. That's the rule of thumb for policymakers, right? So instead of following the old school where we waited for them to, or it came after us, let's involve policymakers right now. Let's inform them, about what is the technology capable of? What are the applications that we need to regulate, like we have already spoken about in this show earlier also, right? And then I think we'll have more informed policy making, and they are open to that. It's and to your earlier point about the age thing, I think it's about the thinking. It's not so much about the age. So I think it's about, if you could be a 70-year-old or a 80-year-old
And you could
and
still be
think
progressive.
and progressive in your thoughts, or you could be a 30-year-old and be regressive in your thoughts. So that's a very important point. But more important, coming back to the thing, is that get the right people who are thinking progressively, and I think policymakers are very open to it. They realize that, and supported by industry, supported by creators, aka developers, supported by startups, which are innovators and innovating in the space, and the investment community is very important, because the investment community in any ecosystem moves the needle in terms of support from ground up, right?
Of what's being developed.
Yeah, so I think it's a framework of all these elements coming together and informing and being part of the conversation for the policymakers is very important. Bring them into the conversation.
And Asif, I'm going to throw that same question over to you.
I am actually far more optimistic on policy, and I'll explain that. But I also have a bit of pessimism that I'll also elaborate on. See, as we age, I believe that when we are young, we are filled with knowledge. We gather lots of knowledge. Over time, it distills into experience. Over even more time, it distills into wisdom. And if there is one thing that we need today, it is that we need wisdom. The problem that we have with AI is it is very intelligent, but intelligence without wisdom, without compassion, without a capacity, without humanity, without love, is the definition of pure evil. So now I'll go back to the question on governance. Actually, I'm quite optimistic that those wise old men, as you look at them, they are not just old, but they are wise. And what they will come up with in the European Act would be the best effort humanity has made to come up with the first draft of a regulation. We will, over time, iterate over it. But my main contention is regulation is about what not to do. The biggest problem in AI that we have is the foundation of AI is using a mathematical objective function. In simple terms, you give machines an objective to achieve. We do not know today how to incorporate compassion into that objective. We do not know how to incorporate humanity, love for others, fellow feeling, or what in the West we call Christian love, into the objective function. So the deeper question that we have to ask is, as we proceed with it, how do we supplement it? Where does that wisdom come from? Where does that humanity come from? And should we be exploring ways to incorporate it into the AI systems that we build?
That's an excellent point. We have been talking about emotional intelligence for a while now, though, right? I mean, emotional intelligence precedes generative AI, I would say, to some extent, before it became a buzzword in the industry.
Absolutely.
My concern with emotional intelligence is, if we are bringing in emotional intelligence, would we have AI algorithms that suddenly become jealous of human beings, and we see an episode of iRobot, for example, being enacted in front of us where, and like literally, even today I was reading somewhere in the news where someone said that AI, and this guy was some key figure in the AI industry, and he said, AI is going to find human beings. They are going to think of human beings as scum, and they will actually look at eliminating us if we were to let AI judge the fate of humanity. So what do you guys think? Like, when we talk about emotional intelligence, and that's what you were referring to, right? Making the algorithms compassionate, bringing in the humane side of things. As such, we as human beings have unfortunately been plagued by negative emotions, right? We are no saints, and we err. And then when we bring that same emotional intelligence to machines, what's going to happen? Asif, I'm going to go back to you for this one and
Thank you,
ask for your
Soniya.
inputs.
See, I would like to take a slightly historic perspective. Humanity, and this is a belief in India, that we are born with so-called mental poisons. We have anger, we have jealousy, we have hatred, we have pride and arrogance, and so on and so forth. I suppose one way of looking at the world religions has been to correct that, to create a framework that gives us a pathway to sort of mitigate those factors and to increase the compassion, increase fellow feeling, and so forth. And if you look around the world, if you look at the wars of the world, one thing you can say for sure, most of the religions have done an extremely poor job of it, right? And so the deeper question, and that's where my pessimism comes from, how likely are we to start on a new enterprise and say, well, we failed with humanity. We couldn't come up with the intellectual architecture to do that with these religions and belief systems and moral codes. But let us try to do it with machines. Will we succeed? Because human beings are conditioned. What we believe are right or wrong are deeply ingrained in society. You go to another society and the moral compass is different. And that is where I worry about.
That is true. That's where we were talking about these biases too, right? Because your moral compass is set by the environment and the ambience you have been a part of. It's part of your upbringing. It's a part of the learning experiences. As we say, a child when a child is born with a blank canvas, and that blank canvas gets painted upon with every interaction the child is having, and that is what shapes the belief system of that child growing up. And as you experience different cultures, your thoughts change, your notions change, your ideologies change, but at some point in time you tend to become a person with a set ideology, and you could talk to a person and say this is what their belief system is. Those are some excellent points. I know Murtuza wants to add to this conversation, so Murtuza, I'm going to go to you, and then we'll move on to our next phase.
Well, I think it's going to be, application related. So sentient AI is an important element. It's still missing, as you will see.
What is sentient AI?
So just what we discussed, that AI which can feel, which can understand human emotions, right? But more importantly, I think it's going to be required in some cases and not required in some certain cases. But more important, we should have as humans always the control and the ability to pull it back, right? For example, in art and creative elements where we are generating, say, using AI to create art or to create literature, and we will need some sentient elements. Otherwise, you can see the difference. You can see, hey, here's an AI app which does art or creates this app, but you can see that this is nothing close to what an artist would create, right? You can feel it, from that. And that's where in those applications, you would need to have a higher element of sentient AI. You would have to have a higher element of weights and biases and training around that, which would be regulated, right? Or for that applications. That's my 2 cents, that, it will be application specific, and make sure that we as humans and as developers or as the technical skills to pull it back. If we ever need to take control, we should always be in control. It's not as simple as just pulling the plug out of the computer and saying, okay, now we are back to square one.
Yes, unfortunately, a lot of the AI is going to live on cloud, on decentralized ecosystems, on ecosystems that are going to be beyond just unplugging your computer and going for it. And as you just mentioned right now, when we talk about sentient AI that is aware, AI that is aware of its ambience and maybe even aware of cultural context. So when it is talking to a person in Japan versus talking to a person in the United States, it understands what are some of the cliches, right, and what are some of the terms that it should not be using because it's a taboo in a certain culture. Now, an interesting thing about generative AI is it is trained on existing data. And a lot of the times when I am using Midjourney or DALL-E, we can provide context as in, please paint me a rendering of a radio studio, right, of a radio station in the style of Picasso. So we can bring in the names of famous artists, right, or we could also say, print me something, create something for me in the style of a comic book, in the style of Marvel, in the style of DC. What I want to understand is, do you see generative AI coming up with its own art styles? And if not, what will happen to human beings if all the artists start leveraging generative AI to create their artwork, because trust me, the process is so much quicker. We use Midjourney all the time for brainstorming. So, with that being said, I am concerned, will human beings lose their creative touch because we become dependent on AI? And if that is happening, will we see new forms of art being created by AI? This is a question that sort of fascinates me. Murtuza, I would love to hear your take on it and then go to Asif.
Quickly, I'll say that, it's both an opportunity. Yes, it will happen that where, AI will create its own form of creativity, but that's also the opportunity for humans to be able to see that, okay, this is created by AI, this is not created by, because there's always going to be a difference. You'll be able to make out that this is not created by humans. So for us to curate that, to bring in that element of the human element is not going away. I want to underline that fact, because yes, and we will have a choice. We will have a choice to choose, hey, this is created by AI because it's quicker. Or, for example, if you are a creator or a developer, you will have the choice of raising the baseline, doing it faster than what you did, but now curating it with your own human intelligence, with your own creativity, with your own skills. So yes, the baseline, so initially it took you, say, 3 months to create something. Now you can create it in 3 days or 3 minutes, but it won't be the final product. And what the final product is, what you will stamp and you will have, that's what my take is. Asif?
And Asif.
I would like to distinguish between two terms, radical creativity and what I would say, because the words are not occurring to me, interpolative creativity or synthesized creativity. See, everything, for example, a large language model says is predicting the next word. And similarly with DALL-E, it is trained on things that we know. When we do that with stable diffusion for vision and for words, using a large language model, it is taking all the human knowledge that is there, all that we know, the creativity of all the writers, the paintings of all the painters. And can it do creativity? Yes, but it would be the synthesizing of the creativity. It's sort of the superposition of a little bit here and a little bit there and taking it together. Yes, that will be there. Can it do truly radical creativity, just like bringing a completely new idea? Just for a moment think, can you come up with a Picasso painting before Picasso was around, but AI was around?
Or
You would
Warhol
never get that.
paintings.
Absolutely not. You cannot possibly in a Newtonian world expect any AI engine to have the radical epiphany that space and time are related and relative. Right? That insight that Einstein had. So that is radical creativity. Those are paradigm shifts. And I don't believe at all that these interpolative engines that AI is currently, these generative models are, will ever, even in principle, be capable of that radical creativity.
So you believe that even in, let's say, 50 years from now, we might not see radical creativity coming in from AI engines?
It could, in the sense that you can explore the space of all the possibilities. For example, we do that. Some of the aerospace design, wing designs came by asking this question. Let us explore every possible way a wing could be designed. Things that human beings have not thought of. And just now, using various algorithms, make something sensible out of those weird designs. And as you evolve to something sensible, very new designs evolve. So yes, to some extent it can. But I would still say that it is exploring the unexplored, but we knew what is unexplored. But when a paradigm shift happens, when Einstein comes up with an idea that says that space and time are relative, it is not, sending a machine to explore a territory that is unexplored. It is a completely different kind of creativity. And that I do believe that even at least from the mathematics that we have today, we have not even started on that journey.
That would be some fascinating journey to be a part of, and having AI as your co-pilot in that journey, right? Versus trying to compete with AI, but just leveraging AI to help you move further ahead in
Right.
that. With that, we are coming towards the end of the show. We have about 3-4 minutes before we wrap up. What I would love to do is leave the audience with something to take away with generative AI. So I'm going to go to you first, Murtuza, and then go to Asif, and maybe talk about 2 to 3 ways in which people can use generative AI today to expedite their workflow, starting with ChatGPT. So one of the things I already mentioned, just to give you guys a little bit of bootstrap, is you folks, anyone listening into Radio Zindagi, if you guys are hitting a creative block, if you are a writer or you are an artist, you can go to ChatGPT, you could go to Midjourney, Stable Diffusion, DALL-E. Midjourney, DALL-E, Stable Diffusion are for art forms, and you could go there, feed it a prompt, say something like, hey, can you create an abstract artwork for me which speaks to a dystopian future, and just be inspired by that and try to get over your creative block. Similarly, if you are writing an article, you can feed up to 1,000, 2,000 words from that article to ChatGPT as a prompt and tell it, hey, here is something, here is a context, what comes next? And as Asif Murtuza explained, generative AI is about what's next. And if you are hitting blocks, if you're hitting your creative block, this is one good way to unlock it and keep moving forward. So Murtuza, one use case from you, Asif, another one from you, and then that way our audience can use it in some way.
I was just going to talk about AI in business and industry. There's always the impact of AI in various industries, but one use case is predictive analytics, enhancement in research. So if you have a lot of data that you want to go process, this is one of the tools you can use quickly to process data.
Asif.
One of the ways that I use actually is to broaden my thinking. Suppose I have a thesis that I believe in. I know that these models are the collective distillate of human knowledge. So somewhere there are very powerful arguments against my thesis, but it's not occurring to me. So I ask it to counter argue with me.
Oh, that is amazing.
I like
guess,
that.
you're getting all different perspectives on something that you're working on. So folks, that's all from Radio Zindagi, from the Silicon Dreams, from 1550 AM here in Fremont. Thank you so much for tuning in for another episode of the Silicon Dreams. And with that, I'm going to say bye to you. And thank you, Asif and Murtuza, for joining us today on another episode of the Silicon Dreams.
Thank you.